Welcome to the Switchblade Sisters Social Club, a true crime podcast where two sisters exploit their worst fears for your entertainment. You're welcome. I'm Dee.
And I'm Rhonda, and together we are the Sake Sisters. For more information, check out our website at www.switchbladesistersocialclub.com or find us on Instagram and Facebook at Switchblade Sisters Social Club.
Thanks for listening. Hi, this is Switchblade Sisters Social Club, where two sisters exploit their worst fears for your entertainment. You're welcome. My name's Dee.
And I'm Rhonda.
Oh, so I've got some updates before we get started. Right?
Okay.
West Memphis 3 update.
Oh, okay.
The three falsely accused teenagers, who are now obviously fully grown adults, because this was a case from the 90s, have managed to petition and win for some DNA to be retested in the case. Or tested for the first time. I'm not entirely sure, but that's exciting because, you know, what's horrifying about that case is that three people were falsely accused, had their lives ruined. Obviously, three children were murdered, but also the real murderer / murderers is still fucking out there.
Yeah.
So it'd be really, really good to get that case resolved. So fingers crossed that comes of something, because if you remember, if you go back to season 2, episode 1, we covered that case. There was a few other sort of suspects in the pipeline that just got dropped because the police focused on these three teenage misfits.
Yeah, and I wonder if the other suspects are still even alive.
Yeah, potentially not. So hopefully, even if they're not still alive, they can be identified. It'd be really nice for the families to have some answers. It'd be really nice for those three boys, now adults, that were falsely accused to get some answers, to have their names properly cleared. Because until the real suspect is named and convicted, they're always going to struggle, I think. You know, there's always going to be people doubting them and so forth. So that would be a really nice case to wrap up. So I'm keeping an eye on that, and I will keep everyone posted if there's any update on that further. But and who knows how long these things take, but fingers crossed. Also, I have been listening to Silly Bill and Brains.
Oh, so have I.
They're so good.
Yeah, on Spotify. You're right. They are like, they remind me of the Beastie Boys, huh?
Yeah, Beastie Boys. They're a bit more punky than hip hop type, you know, they're like more punky hip hop, let's say. So I really like that. I think it's funny that when you listen to their earlier stuff, it's with this American accent, and then as time goes on, it suddenly turns to like thick Scottish dialect.
Yeah.
Which is really cute. They've got a song called Our Favorite C Word.
And you know, I like, we had a few messages that people actually liked that episode, and I was worried that people wouldn't, because, you know, it has a happy ending, and there's it wasn't your typical crime.
Yeah, no, I love that episode, and I love Silly Bill and Brains, and if they ever come to London, we're all going. Also, I read, I don't know if it's out yet, I don't think so, but it's coming, a new Netflix drama called The Witness.
Oh, okay.
About the Rachel Nicholl case, the Wimbledon common murder.
Oh, that's one I find really sad, because it's her son. That's one I'm
apparently
not watch it.
Yeah, apparently it's told through the perspective of the son.
I can't. Oh, no.
So I don't know if I'll be able to. I probably will watch it, but it will be a difficult one to watch.
Yeah,
But
I remember details of that case, and there was that detail, the anecdote about him sticking a plaster on his mom. Do you remember? And I just can't. That fucking broke me. Yeah, I can't.
Horrendous.
I thought you were going to say Baby Reindeer on Netflix, because I've been watching that.
I'm saving it for this weekend because I know I'm going to love it. So I just want to save it for like Sunday proper binge in my pajamas, stress-free.
Yeah, it is definitely a bingey series. I'm in the last episode, and I still don't know how the fuck it's going to end, but it's dark.
Yeah, but you know, when you want to save, you could tell a show's going to be special, so you want to save it for when you're at your most relaxed and concentrated and focused. Yeah. So, but this one is a sort of long case, so let's get started. Why don't you
tell me
say the line?
Story.
Fantastic. This one is based off a new book. I am a member of NetGalley, which I really recommend if you love reading. As you know, I love reading. If you sign up to NetGalley, you've got the option of reading proofs of books before they come out, which just, if you love books, it's just feels so special. They're electronic versions of these books, so you can send them to your Kindle. And I obviously keep a close eye on the true crime as well as the crime fiction section. And this came up as an option, so I read it. It's now out, I think. And the book is called The Mysterious Mrs. Hood, a true Victorian mystery of scandal, arson, murder, and betrayal.
Oh, okay. So it's old timey today.
It's old-timey. This book is by Kim Donovan, and the story is actually about her great great aunt.
Okay. You know, I remember when you first told an old timey one back in season one, I was like, oh, because I used to get bored in history
Belle
class at
Gunness.
school. Yeah, yeah. And I used to get bored in history class at school. And I thought, oh, how salacious can these old timey cases be? But
I proved you wrong.
yeah, and I love when they involve women.
You love when they involve women.
Like Lady Bathory,
Oh
Belle
yeah,
Gunness, the soap maker, angel makers.
I
I
know.
mean,
Some of them are even more shocking because what they could get away with for longer back
mhm.
then. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
And when they involve women, I mean like as the protagonist.
Okay, well, this one, sadly, the
Oh,
woman is the victim. But
oh, okay.
I'm going to show you a picture of Kim Donovan's great great aunt.
Hmm.
And so she saw this picture and it captivated her.
Hmm.
Okay, and so she wanted to find out more about this woman because she knew she was related to her, right? It's such a Victorian photo, isn't it?
I was just thinking, it's such a creepy old Victorian photo.
Yeah,
They always look creepy from that era.
always. They just can't not. So she found this picture as a child. She was always fascinated because her grandmother told her that this was her mother's half-sister who was murdered before her mother was born. So it's her
Oh,
great grandmother's half-sister. No
okay.
one knew much about the story. So, I mean, imagine if that happened to us, if we found out that something like that happened in our family, we'd be like,
All
we
over that
need
shit.
we need to find out more. So her name was Mary Jane Bennett. And then the author went on a personal mission to investigate what happened to her. So let me take you back to Sunday, 23rd of September, 1900. Okay?
Hmm.
14-year-old John Norton went to Great Yarmouth, South Beach. So this is like Norfolky way, I want to
Hmm.
say, on the coast, right? So 14-year-old John Norton goes to Great Yarmouth, South Beach, where of course he was working because he was already 14. So, and on his way to work, he notices some clothes in the dunes and goes to have a look. What he finds is the body of a young female. Her face was bruised and there was a bootlace tied around her neck. He ran to the jetty for help and he found PC Edwin Manship. Um, and in 1900, the Great Yarmouth Borough Police Force was headed by Chief Constable Parker. And on a weird side note, Chief Constable Parker was also the superintendent of the fire brigade, inspector of hackney carriages, which I think is like taxis of the time, and the inspector of fish.
Oh, is that a side hustle?
Yeah, little weird fact there. So it's now around 6:30 a.m. and PC Manship was fairly inexperienced and he set about hiding the body from public view as it was about 20 yards from the pavement rather than preserving the crime scene. Now this is
Mm,
1900. They don't have very much in terms of forensics, but at the time photography was used at crime scenes. So ideally, he would have left the crime scene as is before, the photographer arrived. Blood and fingerprint analysis only really became a proper thing in court in 1902, so we're only a couple of years off using fingerprints and so forth. The woman was wearing a straw hat, which for some reason the PC removed. She had a skirt on and a matching jacket. Her underwear had been pulled down by her ankles and torn. He noted a wedding ring. The bootlace round her neck was not from her own boots. and he looked in her pockets and found gloves, kid gloves. He lifted the body to check underneath and found a white handkerchief, and he found a satchel handle, but no bag. So it looks like quite a violent attack, right?
Mm.
John came back with the cart. That's John Norton, age 14, who seems to be doing a better job than the PC. John came back with a cart and two more PCs, and they took the body to the mortuary. They arrived at 7:45. So they've now interfered with the crime scene beyond belief and left it totally unattended. The police surgeon arrives at 8 a.m. His name is Dr. Thomas Lettuce, and I can already tell he's either going to be my case crush or the case villain. You know, I love a case crush.
Mhm.
He examined the body. He even used a microscope, so he was thorough. And he noticed scratches under her eyes and the side of her nose and under her jaw. He left the bootlace in place so the senior investigating officer could see it. So at this point, he becomes my case crush. He examined her clothes because they're still trying to identify who this woman even is at this point, right? He finds the number 599 written on the inside of her blood-spattered top. Dr. Lettuce estimates, according to the rigor mortis, that she has been dead for 6 or 7 hours, so killed in the middle of the night. I just have to say at this time, this is the time where police were still taking pictures of murder victims' eyes because
Mhm.
it was still believed that you would be able to see the last image they saw imprinted on their retinas.
I never heard that.
Yeah, which is interesting.
Mhm. Is there any
Interesting.
scientific proof or evidence to suggest that this
I
is
mean, it's not something we believe anymore,
okay?
so I think it's been disproved. So Great Yarmouth is quite a small town, right? And in a lodging house across the town, the Rudrum family, I have to, every time I read that, I read Red
Red
Rum.
rum.
Yeah. So apologies if I slip into Red Rum from The Shining. But the Rudrum family were just waking up. Eliza Rudrum woke up because her lodger's baby was crying. When she went to investigate, she found the child on its own. The gossip mill of this small town had already worked its magic, and eventually the police investigating the murder heard that there was a landlady complaining that her tenant had not come home all night, leaving her baby unattended. So they're like, hang on a minute, maybe this is the woman that we've just found, right? Mr. John Rudrum, Eliza's husband, was a shoemaker, and they made extra money by renting out their rooms over the summer months because they lived on a seaside town, right? The police went to go and tell the Rudrums of their finding of this body. Mrs. Rudrum took the police officer to the room of her lodger and handed him a photo of her tenant, Mrs. Hood. They interrogated Mrs. Rudrum. She told them Mrs. Hood was a widow from York, apparently. She went out last night to meet her brother-in-law, meaning her dead husband's brother. None of the Rudrums had met this brother-in-law. Mrs. Hood described him as a jealous man, which is a weird way to describe your brother-in-law.
Mm.
It was her husband's brother, like I said. Apparently, her husband died a month before the baby, Rose, was born. Mrs. Hood thought that the brother-in-law had been following her. So already is creepy vibes, right? Creepy, creepy.
Mm.
She had arrived the previous Saturday evening with very little luggage. What clothes she did have seemed new and not cheap. So remember, they found like kid gloves, which I think is like goat leather or whatever, and like handkerchief and all sorts. So she was dressed nice, you know? Um, on the evening she arrived, she told Mrs. Rudrum that she was meeting her brother-in-law after she put the child to bed because he was getting a train to London at 9 p.m. But the last train to London that day was in fact 6:50 p.m. So someone there is lying, right? She came home that night around midnight, drunk. She had left the baby alone with the landlady. I don't know if the landlady was okay with this, but obviously very different time. In the week or so that she was there, she was regularly contradicting herself, giving herself different ages, dropping different facts about her background, saying she'd been married for different lengths of time. So, you know, suspicious, right? She regularly took baby Rose to the beach, and she was there on Thursday, 20th September, because she was approached by a photographer doing tintypes, and she got a picture of her and her baby Rose.
What's tintypes?
It's a type of old-fashioned photography. So
Okay.
basically, there was a photographer there doing pictures for the tourists. This is September, so it's kind of the end of the season, I guess, but the photographer's still out there. And that was a picture that Mrs. Rudrum presented to the police and helped them identify the lady on the beach as this Mrs. Hood. The next day, on the Friday evening, a letter addressed to Mrs. Hood arrived for her from Woolwich. Mrs. Hood arrived back at 11 p.m. that night and was given the letter by the Rudrums. She said it was from her brother-in-law. She read it out loud, and it said, "Meet me at the big clock at 9 p.m. and put your baby to bed." The letter was signed Hood. The big clock, by the way, was the town hall, and the appointment was the following day, Saturday. No one's seen this letter since. On the day that she died, Saturday, she went out with baby Rose in the morning, came back for lunch, spent the afternoon in her bedroom, and then left for her appointment at around 6:30 or 7 o'clock. But she did come back briefly at 8:30 and apparently had dressed up looking nice. One of the Rudrum daughters saw Mrs. Hood waiting outside the town hall just before 9 o'clock, and that was the last time anyone saw her alive. At around 10:45, this might anger you, a couple called Alfred and Blanche were on the beach and they heard another couple arguing and a woman scream, "Mercy." They didn't report it because, we all know how different the attitude towards women and violence against women was at the time. But when they left 15 minutes later, they said they saw the man straddling the woman who was motionless on her back, which to me is like next level violence, right?
So what was their reason for not reporting it?
I don't know. I don't know whether they were meant to be there or not.
Mm.
The couple did make a statement the next day, I guess, when they heard about the murder, or maybe they were tracked down. But when the police took the couple to the beach to interrogate them further and to get them to point out the exact location, there was more than 200 looky-loos on the beach, like people just sort of watching the crime scene and, being nosy. So Blanche struggled to identify the exact location. Mrs. Rudrum gave police two of the baby outfits, and they also had 599 written on the inside of them in black ink, like the woman's top, right? And Mr. Rudrum went to the police station and formally identified the body as their lodger. But it would still take another 6 weeks to find out her true identity, because surprise, surprise, Mrs. Hood is not her real name. On that Sunday, the day after she was found, no, on the day she was found, I guess, because she died on Saturday. On Sunday, Dr. Lettuce performed a full postmortem. The scratches on her face and her chin were from the bootlace, which was initially placed wrongly around her chin, then slipped down around her neck. There were no scratches on her hands, so she was held down and unable to fight back. There is evidence of sexual assault and clear signs of asphyxia, so suffocation. They discounted PC Manship's theory that she had killed herself. PC Manship. He makes me think of like Faulty Towers.
Hmm. Like Manuel.
Yeah, but like after that case, you remember Ellen Greenberg,
Yeah.
who supposedly killed herself by stabbing herself 10 times in the back of the head. I mean, who knows? While police traced Mrs. Hood, meanwhile, police traced Mrs. Hood to a pub called the Mariner's Compass at 9:45, the day that she died, with a man who looked nervous. He had a big mustache. They left at 9:55. William Borking, the pub landlord, recognized Mrs. Hood's jacket. This is kind of sweet because it had an intricate detail at the back, and he was so taken by it, he actually sketched it.
Oh.
Isn't that cute? A couple days later, Wednesday, 26th of September, just after 9 p.m., there's a shopkeeper called John Rochford O'Driscoll who sees someone walk into his shop in Lowestoft. And I Googled, and that's around, in today's transport, a 19-minute car ride. So obviously it would take longer to travel that distance back in 1900, but not that long, right? It's quite close to Great Yarmouth.
How did they travel back then? Did they have cars? I know they had trains.
They had trains, and I guess they had horse and carriages, and I guess they
Cars
had
did
some
not
cars.
exist then, did they?
They did exist. I don't know
Okay.
how. many people in the public had them.
Okay.
So a guy walks into his shop a couple of days after the murder. He had a big tash and scratches on his face that looked several days old. His hands were scratched up too. He looked between 25 and 30 years old. He asked for the newspaper with the best account of the Great Yarmouth murder, which by now, especially local people had heard of. Then the shopkeeper notices that he's missing a bootlace. So as soon as the customer left, O'Driscoll went straight to the police station. He is a true crime enthusiast, isn't he? The press got hold of the story pretty quickly. PC Manship was even interviewed by the Eastern Evening News, which doesn't seem like a PR coup, but anyways. And then I went on a little side note in this book, including because they included some facts about like the newspaper industry at the time. In 1900, the adult literacy rate in the UK was 97%, which had risen from 28% in the middle of the previous century. So in 50 years, it had gone from 28% to 97%.
What explains that? Compulsory schooling?
I guess so, yeah, and increasing school age and so forth. But it means that more people are reading newspapers. And railways meant that the papers were being distributed further and wider. So stories could become national stories quite quickly. The Times even had its own trains, which I found fascinating. Do you remember when we did the episode on cemeteries and there were cemeteries with their own trains? The Victorians viewed crime, true and fiction, as a form of entertainment, but not just Victorians, if we're honest, modern day as well. And way back when, people loved a good public hanging. And crime was often sensationalized, which we do try not to do anymore, but it happens. Even in the news, believe it or not, it was sensationalized. There's a great book on this subject by Lucy Worsley called A Very British Murder, where she tracks the history of true crime and crime fiction as a form of entertainment in quotation marks. It's amazing. It's such a good book. Anyways, this crime was named the Yarmouth Beach murder by the press, which, you know, it's not very inventive, but it does what it says on the tin. And there was lots of misinformation being spread. And I've put in my notes, plus ça change. And then I was like, oh, fuck, I hope Rhonda doesn't ask me for the rest of that quote because I can't remember it.
Oh, is there more?
Yeah.
I love
something
that
about,
quote.
I know, the more it changes, the more it stays the same or something like that. The following Sunday, Mrs. Hood's murder appeared in the Sunday papers, which were known to be even more sensational and used to outsell the London daily papers by a lot. At this time, there was no photo printing in newspapers, so there was a lot of inaccurate line drawings of the victim and the crime scene, etc., etc. Probably the guy with the mustache that everyone's talking about. The Weekly Dispatch even offered a reward for any intelligence on the case. And there were loads of responses, including 3 men whose wives were missing at the time. So again, very similar tactics to what are used today, right? So by mid-October, the case was assigned to Criminal Investigation Department at Scotland Yard under Chief Inspector Alfred Leach. I wonder if he's related to the Leach brothers that were involved in catching Levi Belfield. Let's assume that they were, and that it's just a long history of amazing Leach police officers, right? So Alfred Leach had over 26 years of experience, and he decided to focus on 2 bits of evidence. Do you want to guess?
No, tell me.
Okay. The 599 mark on the
Yeah,
clothes.
I'm curious about the numbers. Why were there numbers on them?
Okay, so the 599 mark, if you remember, was found both on the lady's clothes that she was wearing when she'd been murdered, and the child's clothes that they had back at the room that she was renting. It was determined to be a laundry mark. So, you know, there wasn't like plumbing in the same way at the time, and a lot of people would send their clothes out to be laundered. And so quite often the laundry companies would write your customer number on the tags. So they know whose item is what, you know, belongs to whom and who it needs to be sent back to. So they decided that that was probably a laundry service number, but they obviously have no idea which laundry service. They also focused on the fact that Mrs. Hood, we're calling her Mrs. Hood for now because we have not identified her, that she had been to South Africa, which came to light because she'd mentioned it a few times. And at the time there was conflict there, and it was when the British invented concentration camps, FYI. So it had been a topic of conversation between the woman and her landlady at the boarding house in Great Yarmouth. And she'd mentioned a few times that she just got back from South Africa. While this is continuing, the baby Rose is staying with the Rudrums, which is above and beyond a B&B owners, like Call of Duty. Scotland Yard are now making inquiries at laundries. At the time, the laundry industry is a growing laundry, and the number of laundry workers has grown from 167,500 in 1861 to 200,000 at the turn of the century. So lots of laundries, basically. People are washing their clothes more, which is great. They started in the Woolwich area because that is where the letter that Mrs. Hood got, remember saying, meet me at the clock tower?
Mm-hmm.
That came from Woolwich. So they're like, maybe that's where she's originally from and where she'd come, from. They found loads of laundries, obviously, and loads of people that had been assigned the number 599, including, to complicate matters, domestic workers who shared the same number as their employers, et cetera, et cetera. So they eliminated them one by one until they found Kingdom's Laundry on Bexley Heath High Street, and owned by Mr. John Savage, and which is quite a name for a true crime story, isn't it? But I know someone who's got the most ironic name because he's absolutely adorable, and his surname is Slaughter.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So Mr. Savage is shown the picture of the 599 mark on the child's clothes and the beach photograph of the two, the mother and daughter, and he identifies her and the number as being assigned to Mrs. Bennett of Bexley Heath. So we have a name now.
Oh, and that's the lady from the photograph surname.
Yeah, the murdered lady is called at this point, possibly called Mrs. Bennett. Other police officers are also looking at passenger lists of people coming and going from South Africa. They were looking for Mrs. Hood on the assumption that this was her real name. And they did find a Mr. and Mrs. Hood who sailed to Cape Town on the 17th of March, 1900. One employee remembered them and remembered that they had an old label on one of their suitcases that had been partly torn to reveal another name underneath. And can you guess what that name was? Bennett. Yes.
I thought that was a trick question.
No. So this little bit is amazing, all right? Because bear in mind it's 1900, right? This is Collins Sutton level police work. The police got in touch with the steamship company, Union Castle, who put them in touch with their travel agent, Jacob & Co. They managed to trace the sale to Mr. and Mrs. Hood to the travel agent, Henry Finch. He remembered selling tickets to them on the 7th of March, and that they paid with 7 5-pound notes and 1 10-pound note and some coins. The travel agent had kept a note of all the banknotes, and they were traced back to the Lloyds Bank in Woolwich, who were able to confirm that the cash had been withdrawn on the 23rd of February by a man named Bennett.
I'm impressed that they actually had some sort of paper trail
Right?
back then. Yeah.
Again, 1900s. So
I wonder even how they tracked and traced that back.
So I mean, we're quite snobby, I think, about record keeping before computer era, but that is impressive, isn't it? So they've got two sources that are confirming that this woman is probably called Bennett. And so they identify her as Mary Jane Bennett, the woman in the photograph I showed you originally. Mary Jane Bennett was born on the 28th of August, 1977. They lived in Bow Street, East London. So they're proper Cockneys.
Wait, 1877.
1877. Did I say 1977? All right. 1877. So at the time of her death, she was 23. 2 months after Mary Jane is born, her mom leaves, and the dad is left to raise her, but he gives her to the grandparents as he was struggling to cope. William, her dad, worked on ships, and he saw very little of his daughter. And then when he came back to shore permanently, he had a new wife and child. Mary Jane was 8 at this point, and I guess was just properly abandoned by her dad because she stayed with her grandparents. Mary Jane was super musical, and by 18, she was a music teacher earning her own money. She met 16-year-old Herbert John Bennett at this time when he was working as a shop assistant. I'm going to be calling him Herbert throughout, even though, as you can tell, he had many aliases and used different names for different purposes, but we're going to call him Herbert. Herbert caught her attention and they conspired for him to take violin lessons so that they could be alone together, which is sneaky and I like it, but I don't like Herbert. She charged him a reduced rate, but still, like, I wish I got paid to get to go on dates. Anyways, that made me sound like a sex worker, or like I want to be one. Herbert was remembered as an average student in terms of grades and conduct at school. His mum died suddenly when he was 17. Herbert had been having violin lessons for a year. And he knew that Mary Jane's father would not approve of him or accept the marriage because he didn't earn very much. He was a bit younger and so forth. And it's like, it sucks that that's even a consideration because this is the father who abandoned her as well, you know? But it's that time. Anyway, about a year or more of violin lessons. Surprise, surprise, Mary Jane becomes pregnant. Mary Jane's family now have no choice but to accept the marriage. Herbert's dad thought it was ridiculous because his son was only 18 at this age, at this point, and on a shit wage. But Herbert was determined. He moved out of his house into 1 Addison Road, Royal Victoria Docks, which I checked and doesn't exist anymore. But it's actually where the Excel Center in that development is.
Oh.
Yeah, and then things just get like willy-nilly silly at this point. Wow, that was a really old person way of phrasing it, but it just raised my anxiety so much. So Herbert said he was 4 years older than he was on his marriage license, and that his alive father was deceased because he was pissed off that John didn't agree with the marriage. And William, Mary Jane's dad, and Selina were witnesses, and both signed their surname as Clark, even though they weren't officially married, because William actually didn't know if his wife was alive or dead, the one that abandoned Mary Jane and him. So he struggled to get a divorce from her, and didn't know if he was free to remarry. So like the whole family is just messy, isn't it? The couple ran out of savings quickly, so they moved back in with Mary Jane's grandmother, Amy. And Herbert soon lost his job and kind of absolved himself of all responsibility for taking care of his family because they were living rent-free. Amy was helping with the childcare, blah, blah, blah. So he just kind of poodled about shooting guns at small animals. That was his hobby. Mary Jane, meanwhile, continues to teach. Sorry, I said that the grandmother helped with childcare. She didn't because something really sad happened. The baby was stillborn. But in early 1898, Mary Jane got pregnant again. And soon after her grandmother died, she had left the butcher shop they lived in and the flat to William, Mary Jane's dad. Mary Jane's dad thought Herbert was a waste of space. I mean, he fucking sounds it. And so he kicked them out of the flat that they were living in, which seems particularly cruel because, like, regardless of what you think of Herbert, his daughter's pregnant. Amy had left Mary Jane £15, so they used it as a deposit on a small house near Clapham Junction. And Herbert was really angry that he had to go back to work. Can you imagine? So their property had like a grocery shop on the ground floor, but Herbert hated this and whinged about having to wake up early to go and buy stock from the markets. And he was shit at running the business. He kind of opened up when he wanted to, and they were just losing money from it constantly. Mary Jane tried to restart her music lessons, but I guess they were living in an area that wasn't particularly wealthy, so people weren't really taking violin lessons, you know? William, Mary Jane's dad, even though he kicked them out of the flat, sent his oldest son, William Jr., to go and live with Mary Jane and Herbert to help in the shop. which kind of seems like he was trying to get rid of his son because he's not big into looking after his own children, this one, is he? But William Jr. was able to report on seeing a lot of tension between Mary Jane and Herbert Bennett. He often saw Mary Jane crying. He once saw Herbert hit Mary Jane. And she, of course, told her neighbors at this time that her black eye was from falling down the stairs. William Jr. even saw Herbert point a gun at Mary Jane, which is just horrible. Herbert was kind of always desperate for money and even went to Mary Jane's dad, William's house to demand that the piano that had been left to Mary Jane by grandmother Amy should be returned to them. William declined because he knew that Herbert was just going to sell it. Herbert then pulled out a gun on his father-in-law. What is it with this guy? William and Selena overpowered him, but I mean, what a fucking loser, you know? William went to the police about this. The Bennetts lost most of their belongings, presumably sold. They lost their business, and Herbert had to get an actual shop job. Oh dear. He was working in a shop called Johnson's. Mary Jane at the time was heavily pregnant. She joined a dispensary, which was a charity that gave free healthcare to the poor, which would have been embarrassing for Mary Jane, who came from, an okay family in terms of comfort of wealth, But she's clearly putting her baby's needs first and above her pride, which is very, very admirable, isn't it? Just before the baby was born, the couple moved to 216 Wandsworth Bridge Road. It was quite a pricey flat, so loads of people were wondering how the fuck they could afford it. Now, I know that Wandsworth Bridge Road is still there. I've driven over it many of times, but I was trying to find 216. You know how I love finding the properties, right? I'm not sure if I did, but let me show you because it'll at least give you a sense. I can't tell because I don't know much about architecture, whether these houses would have been around in 1900-ish, but this is the street. So potentially it's one of these houses. And I even tried zooming in on these crests and everything and above the doors to see if there was like years, But this is the street.
Yeah, I don't know what era that is.
Me neither, but you can tell that it's a nice street, right? Like big, leafy, et cetera, et cetera. That was probably the same at the time. So, they also not only moved into this fancy place, but they also hired a private doctor after, Mary Jane having to be signing up for charitable healthcare. Baby Ruby was born on the 13th of October, 1998. So she was 2 years old.
1898.
1898, Jesus Christ. Ruby was born on 13th of October, 1898. So she was 2 years old when her mom was born. When her mom was murdered. So when Mary Jane went to Great Yarmouth, not only did she give herself an alias, Mrs. Hood, but she also changed her baby's name from Ruby to Rose. So Ruby and Rose are the same baby. It soon came out that the new money was coming from trading violins, so Mary Jane's area of expertise, except they were being shysty about it. They were buying cheap violins and selling them as antiques. So she would pose as a woman in dire straits needing to sell her precious violin. They were buying the violins wholesale for under 5 shillings. No, I don't know how much a shilling is, but they were selling them then for 30 shillings. So 6 times as much. They were making up to 5 or 6 pounds a day. Again, no idea how many shillings in a pound, but to put this in perspective, the fancy place that they were renting cost £30 a year, and they were earning 5 to 6 pounds a day. So within a week, they were earning their annual rent, which is crazy if I've done that maths right. Herbert kept his job because they needed to keep up the pretense that that was the main source of income, right? And in April 1899, they moved back across the river to East Hill to an address that also no longer exists, where they stayed for 6 months before moving to Rossiter Road in Balham, which looks very nice and which I did find. Again, not their specific house, but let me show you. Rossiter Road in Balham. Nice road.
Oh.
Some of those buildings look like they might be from that era. So, they're doing okay for themselves, right?
I mean, these areas nowadays are considered nice. Wandsworth, Clapham.
Do you know what I mean? Some
Mm.
of them were less nice back in the day when we were teenagers, so I don't know. Um, but at this point, the Bennett's violin business got even shadier. Herbert was buying a bunch of violins on credit and then disappearing before paying. So he was getting into loads of debt. Mary Jane expressed a bit of remorse for the deceitful nature of her business to their landlady, Mrs. Cato, but Herbert clearly felt no remorse. The landlady claimed Mary Jane was not a great wife because she wasn't good at cooking or cleaning or looking after her own kid. Mrs. Cato seems a little bit judgy. At this point, Herbert was employed at the Balham Sainsbury's as the first bacon hand.
But what does that mean?
Looking after the bacon? I don't know. He was a shit employee and also took up gambling. What a guy, right? He was fired within 2 months. So I'm just trying to get across how much of a fucking loser Herbert is. Is that coming across?
Work shy, lazy.
Yeah, like wants to have the lavish lifestyle without working for it, dragging
Sounds
his
like your
wife,
ex-husband.
dragging his wife into a whole bunch of shit she's clearly uncomfortable with, just to, help them survive. So then by the end of the 1900s, so Herbert starts talking about opening up a music shop in Taunton in Somerset, which does sound like a lovely dream. And by the end of January 1900, they move out of Mrs. Cato's house and move to 5 Morecambe Terrace in Taunton. The address no longer exists either. Maybe it never did, because this was just the forwarding address they left with the Catos to throw people off who were chasing them for money. Instead, they went to Westgate-on-Sea in northeast Kent, where they took over a greengrocer's, which I will show you. So much fun looking at property porn on this one. I'm just going to show you some pictures of Westgate-on-Sea, just so you can see that it's cutesy.
Mm. I mean,
Little.
the Kent beachside is nice, isn't it?
Exactly. So cute little seaside town, right? They take over a greengrocer. So was this a fresh start for them? They bought the business off Theodore Merton. Theodore was thrown at the viewing when Herbert asked how much the business was insured for. Red flag.
Mm.
When Theodore Merton told them the amount, £545, which was probably a lot, Herbert said it was underinsured. Herbert paid £535 for the business, paying £375 upfront by check, and the remaining amount would be paid in 2 installments over the next 6 months. The check cleared, surprisingly, I know, and the business was transferred over to Herbert. The shop was on 5 Station Road in Westgate-on-Sea. Want to see it?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if this is the right building, but this is a map. So you can see really close to Mildred's Bay Beach, and this is the high street, and this is supposedly where it is. So yeah, cute. And wait, hang on, I've got another picture here. What's all this about? Yeah, so here's let me share this. This is the store that's in the location at the moment. And if I spin around, you can see just like typical little high street seaside town. There's some public toilets for you. Yeah. Actually, it's not the high street, is it? It's the station road. So yeah, there we have it. So they take over that business. On the 8th of February, 1900, a week after they arrive in Westgate-on-Sea, their employee, who they kept on from the previous employer, noticed that there was a gas fire still on when he was leaving work in the evening. He told Herbert, but Herbert told him to go home. So he's left Herbert and this gas fire on. Soon after the employee left, so did Herbert, Mary Jane, and baby Ruby. Then at 8:10 p.m., a fire destroyed the whole shop. A firefighter lived a few doors down and arrived within minutes. But just an hour later, Herbert was seen in the pub drinking and singing. So there was immediate suspicions. His fucking business goes up in flames, and like an hour later, he's just like having a laugh at the pub.
This guy is an idiot.
I mean, that just seems stupid, right?
Mm.
Herbert instantly claims on all the insurances, which remember he had already asked in-depth questions about. To be fair, if you're buying a business, you should ask about all of those things, but he waited a week. He waited a week before burning down his business. They reopened a few days later in the vacant shop next door, and they auctioned off their damaged stock and got even more produce on credit because they had lots of sympathy, because people are like, oh, these newcomers, and then there's a fire. The fire insurance company marked the fire down as unsatisfactory, but they didn't have any evidence, so they settled and gave Herbert £208. Remember, it was insured for 545, I think. So Herbert's now in profit, even with what he paid for the store, right? On the 17th of March, 1900, the Bennetts left, abandoning their business completely. They left no forwarding address. They had a bunch of product on stock on credit, so they just abandoned with all of their, with all of their debts. The previous owner, Theodore Merton, was so suspicious he went back to the store and found several letters from Willie Clarkson, a London-based theatrical wig and costume maker.
Okay.
Where do you think this is going?
Oh, they're reinventing themselves, huh?
Uh-huh. Theodore Merton, another case crush, I think, because he's like detective, armchair detective, right? Theodore Merton wrote to Willie Clarkson, the wig maker, and worked out that the Bennetts had been planning on leaving Westgate-on-Sea for a while, which is funny because they were there for like 5 minutes. Just 5 days after the fire, Herbert had written to Willie asking for the price list of wigs for both ladies and men. He ordered a blonde lady's wig in the latest fashion and a men's wig of black curly hair with the side parting and matching mustache. And he wanted it within a week. Mary Jane collected the wigs on the 6th of March. They then dropped in unexpectedly at Herbert's father and stepmother to ask if they would take baby Ruby for a month or two. Which is like, which one is it? It's a big difference between 1 month or 2 months. And it seems really random to just drop by and be like, hey, can you take this baby for a really long time?
And how old is the baby at this point?
Like under 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
They said they were going to America on the 17th of March, so in less than 2 weeks. The grandparents agreed because I don't think they felt they had very much choice at all. So on the 17th of March, wearing their new wigs, they left Westgate-on-Sea. They headed to Southampton, but they instead boarded a ship to Cape Town, not America. I don't know why they lied. I think that Herbert was just in the habit of lying to everyone to confuse everyone and to hide from all the people that he owed money to left, right, and center, because between all these shady businesses and gambling and whatnot, he probably owed fucking loads to loads of people. So they get on the boat going to Cape Town as Mr. and Mrs. Hood. It's likely that Herbert felt the net closing in on him, and there was a roaring gold trade in South Africa that he probably thought that he could profit from, right? Because he is an opportunist. Then an interesting thing happens. The people the Bennetts owed money to somehow found each other, and at the end of March, they all met to discuss what to do about it. So they formed like a little support group, including Theodore Merton, because remember, they were due to continue paying him for the rest of the business over 6 months. Some wanted to see him declared bankrupt. Theodore Merton disagreed because then he wouldn't have to pay any of them. And he was the largest creditor, so they all decided to go with what Theodore Merton wanted. On the 3rd of May, Herbert's dad and stepmom get a letter from the Bennetts asking after Ruby, but saying little else, even though this letter came from South Africa and not America like they were supposed to be. So They've told the grandparents who are looking after baby Ruby that they're going to America. And then like a month or two later, they get a letter from fucking South Africa instead saying, "Hi, how's the baby doing?" So 4 days after the Bennets get to Cape Town, they board a boat heading straight back to England. Bear in mind how long that fucking journey must have taken.
So what
They,
happened in those 4 days?
I think that they were just literally trying to get people to lose the trail, right? Because they traveled back as Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, which seems like you would do it the other way around. But anyways, they got to Southampton on the 9th of May, 1900, and took up residence in Walham Green, 78 Harwood Road. They stayed there 2 nights before Herbert said they needed cheaper accommodation. So they went to 64 Wickham Lane, Plumstead, and rented off the Ellistons, which is weird because Mr. Herman Elliston was the local police constable. So you'd think that Herbert would not want to have a landlord that was the popo.
Or he's hiding in plain sight, or he thinks it's some sort of protection that
Maybe.
he doesn't look dodgy if he lives with a police officer.
Maybe. When Mary Jane went to pick up the baby from her in-laws, they asked why the massive change of plan, like how did you end up in Africa instead of America? All she said that everything was arranged for America, but then Herbert changed his mind last minute. So they went to Africa for 5 minutes and then came back. I would have so many follow-up questions, but I guess they couldn't get anything out of her. Mary Jane failed to tell them that Herbert was back too, instead saying that she was taking Ruby to go meet him in Cape Town. So still with the lies. Instead, she took Ruby to meet Herbert back at their new home in Plumstead. Herbert kicks off instantly that she took so long, and the landlady reported that they fought often and loudly. Herbert eventually found the 6-week contract working on the grocery counter at the Woolwich Co-op. His colleagues report he regularly stole from the store and also went with loose women. It's like, hang on a minute. He's the loose man here. But anyways, again, sign of the times. But yet again, shit husband, shit employee, shit person, right? The landlady reported he regularly talked about his family being a burden. And Herbert continued to be violent towards Mary Jane as well. Surprise, surprise. He even called his own daughter a bastard. Like it's her fault or it even matters that they had premarital sex. Because you remember she was pregnant. Mary Jane was pregnant when they got married. He was also violent towards baby Ruby.
No.
I know. About a month later, the couple rented accommodation in Woolwich Road in Bexley Heath. But the night before they were due to move, the landlady heard Herbert screaming at Mary Jane that he had rented his own accommodation and wouldn't be living with them in the new place. So Mary Jane moves into this new accommodation, introducing herself to the neighbors as Mrs. Bartlett. Sometimes she claimed her husband was a traveling salesman, sometimes that he was a very busy detective, and her husband did visit and stay over occasionally, but basically from this point onwards, they live separately. Eventually, she moves to 1 Glencoe Villas, which is where she was living at the time of her death. It's a small 2-story detached house with the door on the side. So I felt like that was enough information to find the house on the street, right? Which is called Isane Road. So here it is. So I tried to find it on the street and I tried to find it on Zoopla. This one, I think it is. No, this is the house next to hers. That's as close as I could get. I don't think her house has been sold recently. I don't know how useful it is me showing you information about the house next to hers, but the rooms are massive, right? So chances are hers is probably the same. This carpet looks like it was from fucking Victorian times. Oh,
yeah.
That looks like there's been murders there. Anyway, there it is.
Creepy.
There's that carpet again. Hideous.
Creepy about it.
Anyway, so you can see that there's quite nice space there, right? So the Bennets moved in there in early August. Mary Jane became, when I say Bennets, I mean Mary Jane and Ruby. Mary Jane became friends with her neighbors and her neighbor and fellow new mom, Edith Savage, who was the wife of the laundry service that she used. Again, she told people that her husband was a detective, a sailor, a traveling salesman. Her husband visited once a week, usually on a Wednesday. So he basically just put his wife and kid up in a place, rented his own room, had his own fucking life, and just did the bare minimum for his family. At the end of August, Mary Jane actually got very bad with the flu for a few weeks, and when she recovered, no thanks to Herbert, she told everyone she was going to go on holiday to Yorkshire with her husband to help her recuperate. And on the 14th of September, she bought a dove gray colored jacket and skirt, which is the one she was found murdered in. She also bought a blouse and a veil and a straw hat. Then at 3 p.m. on the 14th of September, she left for Liverpool Street, which is one of our main stations in London. At the time, Herbert was staying most of the time in Woolwich, where he shared a room with another man in a boarding house. He worked at the Royal Arsenal, and even though he had a laborer's lowly paid job, he was maintaining two households basically, and never seemed to be short of cash. And he was even buying tailor-made suits and bowler hats. So
So what
again,
was he
living it up.
doing?
I imagine shisty dealings and borrowing money and all sorts.
Mhm.
He starts dating a woman called Alice because he was telling everyone he was single. She was a domestic servant in West London, and she was only allowed Thursday afternoons and some Sundays off. I mean, the life of a Victorian domestic servant sounds hellish, doesn't it?
Mm.
Like, worst fucking nightmare for
I
me.
mean, they, not that we were around then, but whenever you see it depicted in movies, Victorian times were harsh times.
Oh, just everything about them.
Mm.
He pretended he was going to Bexley Heath loads because his cousin Fred lived there with his wife and baby. So you know how he was visiting his actual wife and baby most Wednesdays, he was pretending it was, his nearest family. He met Alice's whole family and they all loved him. He convinced Alice less than a month after they met to go on holiday with him, which feels very fast even by today's standard to go on holiday together. They settled on Great Yarmouth because Alice's friend Kitty had just got back from there. Herbert wrote to two landladies on the 30th of July, 1900. Remember, we're getting close to the date of the murder here, which was September. One called Mrs. Newman and one at the boarding house where Kitty had stayed called Mrs. Rudrum. He was asking for availability for the following Saturday and Sunday for 2 rooms. So although they were going on holiday together, they were going to be respectable and stay in 2 separate rooms. Neither actually had accommodation, so he found accommodation at the Crown and Anchor Hotel on one of the quays. Herbert and Alice went to Great Yarmouth. So this is not his wife, this is his mistress, although she doesn't know she's a mistress, right? Herbert and Alice went to Great Yarmouth on Saturday, the 4th of August. And according to Alice, Herbert was the perfect gentleman. And the Thursday after they get back, Herbert turned 21, which is,
How was he so evil as well
I
by
don't
that
know.
age?
He got two telegrams that day, one from Alice saying happy birthday and one from Bexley Heath saying that Mary Jane was very badly ill with the flu, like I said. Herbert had a trip to Ireland booked on the 28th of August with Alice. So another holiday. She must have thought that she had like landed the big time, it's a guy that can afford to take her on all these holidays. He called in sick for 3 weeks, even though he would not have received sick pay. On the trip out to Ireland, Herbert proposed to Alice. So he still went to Ireland, even though his wife, who is responsible for his very young child, is very ill. He still goes to Ireland with his mistress. He proposed to Alice with a diamond and ruby engagement ring. By the way, he explained all this excess money is coming from his violin trade and inheritance. But the problem is he's still married. And divorce is allowed at this point, but only if a man could prove that his wife had been adulterous. Alice accepts the proposal because she obviously doesn't know that he is married to another woman. Apparently Herbert was a gentleman the entire time in Ireland, and they come back to London on the 11th of September, 1900. On the 15th of September, Herbert tells Alice and his landlady he's going back to Gravesend to visit his ill grandfather. He's just full of fucking lies, isn't he? Then on Sunday, he is back in London, but weirdly goes to Alice's mother's house. She washes his suit for him because it's covered in what he claims is iodine from a bottle that broke in his pocket.
Was it her blood? Oh, that's sad.
Not sure, but this is the Sunday, I think. No, I'm not entirely sure. Herbert went back to work on Monday, 17th of September. That was the day Alice handed in her notice. She said it was because of her health, but perhaps she thought that now she would be supported by Herbert, who seems to have all of this flash cash, right? That Friday, Herbert's work record showed that he was at work, so he couldn't be the man that one of the Rudrums heard Mary Jane talking to. But on Saturday, 22nd of September, Alice is working at her house, at the house where she is employed. Herbert's at the Arsenal. Herbert told Alice he was off to see his granddad again. He did not return to his lodgings in London by the time his landlady went to bed at 11:30. Sunday, the day the body was found, Mrs. Pankhurst, Herbert's landlady, was making breakfast and sending cups of tea up to her lodgers. Herbert was not there. He normally told his landlady when he would be out all night. So suspicious, right? Alice was meeting a friend at 1:50 p.m. on Sunday, as Herbert already told her he wouldn't be around to see her. Yet when she's walking to meet her friend in Hyde Park, along comes Herbert. He said he felt in the way at his granddad's house, so he came to see her instead. Then he went home around 5:30, probably went to the pub first because his landlady said he looked disheveled and he was stumbling. Then he left the house soon after. It kind of feels like he's building an alibi, you know? But basically, he was out of sight of his London contacts long enough to be able to go to Great Yarmouth. Great Yarmouth is not that far from London. From that day on, the landlady, Mrs. Pankhurst, said she saw a change in his demeanor. He drank more, he was ruder. Alice was also concerned about his drinking. And on Monday, 24th of September, the day after Mary Jane's body was found, Herbert went to work as usual. That evening, he wrote to Alice to tell her that his grandfather died. His grandfather doesn't exist, or at least not in the way that Herbert is describing him. Tuesday, the Great Yarmouth murder reaches the London papers. And Wednesday, Herbert went out to Bexley and went to Walter Hudson, the house agent. He arrived at 5 p.m. and introduced himself as Mary Jane's husband, Herbert Bennett. He said he wanted to give notice on the house. Weird, right? Like he knows something. Thursday,
And that's the house where she was living with his daughter.
Yeah, exactly. Thursday, and this is at the point where they hadn't identified formally the body yet. The police had not identified the body. Thursday, he saw Alice and asked if instead of the summer, they could get married at Christmas. Friday, Herbert informs the owners of the Bexley Heath house that he was giving notice. Herbert starts clearing the Bexley Heath house, claiming he was buying stuff to set up home with Alice, even giving Alice some of Mary Jane's stuff. He was claiming he was buying this all off of his cousin because they were going to South Africa. So he's telling Alice that it was coming from like his cousin's wife, etc. Herbert told the neighbors that Mary Jane fell ill in Yorkshire and was unable to travel home. So he was taking all of her stuff to her, basically. I mean, this guy looks guilty as fuck, doesn't he? But the neighbors at this point don't know that she's dead. No one knows she's dead yet. They've not identified the body.
I wonder if he had a good memory, because when you lie this much, how do you keep track of what you've said and to who?
I know, right? Monday, 8th of October, he spent the whole day packing up the Bexley Heath house. And on the 17th of October, Alice finishes up work and get, her notice period. So she is now unemployed. They put a deposit on a house in Charlton. Herbert sold his bicycle and piano to a former associate and colleague from the co-op days, and he told him the bike was originally bought for 15 guineas. He wrote to but the guy wrote to the bike manufacturer after the sale, who told him that the bike would never have cost that much, and that the original receipt Herbert showed him must have been forged. So the guy, the colleague, Robert Allen, confronted Herbert. Herbert left his home and moved nearby to avoid any kind of consequences. So he's just constantly on the run, right? It's like, oh, in fear of consequences, let's just move. So Herbert has been clearing his wife's stuff from the Bexley Heath house at the same time as the police are trying to work out their murder victim's identity and connection to Woolwich, which is near Bexley Heath. They eventually go to the Woolwich Co-op and find Robert Allen. It's now the 5th of November. He told them everything he knew about the Bennetts, which none of it about Herbert was glowing. Some of his former colleagues of Herbert also were interviewed, and they told the police about the supposed death of his wife and child in South Africa. So that seems to be the story he's told his colleagues at the co-op while he's off with loose women in quotation marks. And on the 6th of November, Robert Allen tracks down Herbert when he was meant to be meeting Alice. So he basically was working with the police to identify Herbert. Herbert was arrested and taken to Woolwich Police Station. Herbert tried to tell the police he'd found letters from another man in his wife's possession and that they had split last January. He pretended he didn't recognize the woman in the photograph, which the police had already confirmed by several people was his wife. So Herbert is charged with murder. The clothes that Herbert was wearing at the time also bore the 599 laundry mark. Like, come on.
This guy was not very smart at covering his tracks.
No.
Sneaky, but not smart.
Shiesty, but not smart, right? Ugh, but what a guy, right? In his belongings, they found a receipt for the Crown and Anchor Hotel in Yarmouth on the 6th of August when he went there with Alice. This disproved Herbert's lie that he had never been to Great Yarmouth because he was telling the police, I've never been there. The staff member who checked him in also remembered him from a couple of other trips and remembered having a conversation with him about breakfast on Sunday, the 23rd of September, the day that the body was found. Alice believed in Herbert's innocence at first, which, you can't blame her for. It's the man she loved, blah, blah, blah. And she would have been inundated with a whole bunch of information that he was married, that this wife was dead, that he was being charged with her murder, so that they had a kid, there's a lot of new information for her to take on, and you can imagine it would take her some time to process it all, right? On the 8th of November, so things are happening fast now, Herbert is brought to Yarmouth as part of the interrogation. When Mrs. Rudrum realizes that the man arrested was Mr. Bennett, she remembered the letter she got earlier that summer inquiring about the room, because you remember he had asked about rooms at her place, but she didn't have availability. She sent that letter to the police station saying it was in the same handwriting as the letter Mrs. Hood got while she was staying with her.
Oh, the one that was signed off as Hood.
The one that was signed off as Hood that told her meet at the, clock tower the night that she was murdered. So this guy that she was pretending was her brother-in-law, that she was meeting, was actually her husband. When her daughter dropped off the letter at the police station, she noticed a gold chain with a pocket watch that the police had found in Herbert's lodgings. And the daughter said, that's Mrs. Hood's. If you open the back, there are child teeth marks on it. And it was. The reason this is important is because this pocket watch was missing from her body when she was found murdered. So something that went missing from her murdered body was found on Herbert. So he must have taken it, right?
I mean, we have no other suspect.
No. Maybe PC Manship because he's just such a calamity. But on the 9th of November, Herbert goes to the magistrates. The trial is set to start a week later. I found a newspaper from the time, which I just love. Let me show you. In Illustrated Police News. So there was a newspaper called Police News, which we totally would have subscribed to.
Oh, I love their font. That's like our font.
I know. It's so cute, isn't it?
Is that a newspaper from then? I think that looks so cute.
Yeah, so that's from the
Why
first.
don't they look like that now?
I don't know. So that's from the 1st of December, 1900.
Imagine if the Financial Times looked like that.
I fucking buy it. I know, it'd be so much more interesting.
I
So
think I
again,
like
I
the
mean, they
new.
look like that because they didn't have photography, they didn't print photography in newspapers
Mm,
yet. So I guess
yeah.
everything changed. I know, it's so cute.
Reminds me of like the New Yorker now, a
Yeah.
little bit.
So the fiance, Alice, took the stand during the hearing, and most people felt sorry for her. I mean, she's a victim too.
Mm.
She received loads of letters of support. The trial started at the Old Bailey on the 25th of February, 1901, and after a week of hearing all of the earlier mentioned testimonies and so forth, Herbert was found guilty. He still, of course, maintained his innocence, but he was sentenced to death. Herbert made some appeals and he claimed the newspapers prejudiced the trials, etc., but his date of execution was Thursday, 21st of March, 1901, in Norwich. It was the first one there since 1867, so they didn't have them regularly. So where are they all now? Well, they're all dead, obviously, but where were they immediately after? Ruby grew up with Herbert's parents, which, I mean, Mary Jane's dad wasn't much better. Her mom certainly wasn't. She abandoned her too, but hopefully Herbert was an anomaly and not a product of his upbringing. Alice Meadows, Herbert's fiance, eventually saw through him. She married another man a year later, bless her. But fast forward to the 15th of July, 1912. Another body is found on Great Yarmouth South Beach with a bootlace around her neck.
Oh, what? Shut up. So it wasn't her. Wait, this second body wasn't Herbert.
Wait. This
Oh,
time it is 18-year-old Dora May Gray. This murder went unsolved. So does it mean there was a copycat? Or was Herbert not Mary Jane's killer at all?
oh my God. Don't leave it like this.
I'm
Are you
leaving
gonna
it
leave?
like that.
Shut up. No.
Sorry.
Oh, it was all wrapped up and then you added that.
I'm going to say it was a copycat killer
Okay.
because I feel like the evidence against Herbert was too damning.
Oh,
Um,
gee. Oh, you should have left it at he was sentenced.
I know,
And
but what's the
then,
fun in that?
oh,
So
because now we all leave with a fucking unsettled feeling.
yeah, that's why we have the People's Pulse. But I just want to remind you that was all from the amazing book by Kim Donovan, which I think is out now, The Mysterious Mrs. Hood, a true Victorian mystery of scandal, arson, murder, and betrayal. How good was that old-timey story?
Fucking great. But I want to hear part two. Who
I
this
know.
other body was. How did they investigate that one?
I don't know, but they did not find
Oh,
a...
D, it was so concluded when you said he was sentenced.
I hope they make a movie out of that book.
I hope did they solve, no, they never solved the second murder.
No.
Fucking hell. Oh,
Same beach, same method.
it's like the letters. What was that episode called?
Circleville.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm
What
still...
is
Sorry. Should we move on to the People's
this?
Pulse?
People's Pulse.
People's Pulse.
Oh, fucking hell. D.
We need it today. We didn't need it last week. We fucking need it today. I've got a submission from someone who doesn't have Instagram.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So, question is, which song summarizes your life? So, I guess not so much like your theme tune, but which summarizes your life.
I have the perfect one for me.
Okay, so I'm
I have
gonna.
the perfect one for me.
Oh, you want to start with you? Okay, I thought we'd go
Yeah.
at the end. Okay.
No, but I have the perfect one, so I'm gonna go
Okay,
now.
go.
Is she really going out with him?
Bye.
Elvis Costello.
Oh.
Um, I have one submission that I want to just say before I forget, because last night I had my event at the Homegrown Horse St. George's Day event at the Brewery Market, which was amazing. It was so good. It was such a lovely group of people, some regulars, some newcomers, and we've got some more events planned, quite a few more planned in the pipeline. So do keep an eye out on if you haven't signed up to our email list, do that. You can do it on our website, and we will just tell you things as and when they happen. But I did ask everyone at the event to submit an answer for this People's Pulse. I was like, we're recording tomorrow. If you want to be on tomorrow's episode,
Who we got?
fucking send a message. So, Chris from the Brewery Market, he says Brown-Eyed Handsome Man by Buddy Holly.
Oh,
He is a brown-eyed handsome man, so we'll give him that. Who have you got?
oh, there's not more. You said that there was other people.
No, I told him to submit it directly to you because you
Oh,
collate
right,
the
okay.
answers, but he didn't have
Okay.
Instagram.
Okay, so we've got our fave Sam is well, I was going to say number one entry, but second. Okay, so he actually gave multiple answers. He really thought this through. So in relation to my mental age, Teenage Kicks by Undertones. Then he
Nice.
says, in relation to my actual age, Help the Aged by Pulp. That was one of Pulp's shittest songs.
It was.
Fucking terrible song. Great message though. In relation to my children, Give a Little Respect by Erasure. That's a good song. I like that song. And then he actually literally picks the one song I had in mind for me, which was I Wish by Skilo. I wish I was a little bit taller.
Oh, we love our short kings on here, Sam.
That would always be my first choice of
Is
theme
that
tune.
yours?
Yeah, that was mine.
Yeah.
I wish I was a little bit taller. Okay, so we have more submissions. Okay. Oh, Cherry from Crimepedia. She says, "Walk this way." That's a
Nice.
good one.
I do have different songs for different purposes. So my current song to psych me up when I need a bit of like is Tambourine by Eve.
I don't know that fucking song.
Go listen to
How do
it.
you, okay, I have a question, and I was waiting to bring it up on the podcast. So I keep seeing all over Instagram, Facebook, whatever, that Taylor Swift has released an album, right? Now, I don't think I've heard one Taylor Swift song. How come? Where do you even hear new music? How does everyone know Taylor
We've
Swift
had this
songs?
conversation
Yeah,
before.
tell me again. Where do you hear it?
Like radio and leaving the house. It's people who leave the house. They hear
But
it
where
in
do you
shop
fucking hear? What are you listening to? I mean,
on TV and stuff like that. Some people actively search for new music on
okay.
Spotify and stuff.
I mean,
I know
really,
they're crazy. They're crazy.
yeah. I
But whatever.
honestly, because the radio station I listen to is like,
Tambourine by Eve is not a new music. It is from
okay,
the 90s.
but like, it's absolute. When I do listen to radio, it's absolute radio.
Yeah.
So how are you
80s
gonna?
or sometimes 90s. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I
other
don't
people.
even know where you would go to listen. Where I really apparently Beyonce has a country album. Where are people hearing this? Legit
Spotify.
question. Okay. Good answer. Okay.
They would, yeah, right answer. They would hear that she has a country album and then they would go to Spotify
All right.
to
Okay.
listen to it. Yeah. You just don't do that second part because you don't care.
Um.
Give us more answers. Come on.
Okay. Yeah. Do you remember back in the day when we had boom boxes and we used to record from the radio onto cassettes? That's what I was thinking. Okay.
And you missed the beginning or the end, or you'd have the fucking DJ talking over it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got Joe. So Joe says,
Joe from York?
Joe, York Joe.
Yeah, York Joe. Hi, Joe.
That's what her Instagram name is, Joe York Joe. She says highway to hell.
Yeah.
We've got Sophia who says, I Want to Break Free by Queen, which is a great song choice for her because she literally eloped to Spain.
Yeah.
Solo.
Eloped.
Eloped as in like she didn't get like eloped to get married, but isn't
Oh.
eloped running away?
Running away to get married. She eloped with
okay.
herself to Spain.
Oh,
She's
right, okay,
dating herself in Spain. Okay.
Those were our submissions. Do you know what? This was not as popular a People's Pulse question.
But we have a great one. We've got a great one.
Oh, yeah, we've got a great one coming up. Oh, it takes it in a different direction.
Love it.
Yeah, it takes it in a different direction because I think we've covered quite a few 80s and 90s ones. We've covered quite a lot of bodily function ones.
Yeah,
So
but we promise it'll still be good.
Cast the net wider, but next week's a good one.
Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, check out our merch. Check out our Patreon. Haven't plugged our Patreon in a while. Probably because I feel a bit guilty because I haven't done Drunk Real Housewives in a while.
And check out our podcast course if you want to launch your own podcast.
We have lots of things, events, everything. Just go check out our website. It's all on there. Lots of things. Lots of things. More of us. Commission me to write something. I got bills to pay. Whatever. Get Rhonda to do your social media. She also has bills and mouths to feed. Help a sister out. All right.
Thank you.
I cleaned up one of the rooms in my house. Cleared out all the stuff from an ex, and do you know what I found in there? A switchblade.
Oh, what was he planning on doing with that? I
don't
do
know.
not want to know.
But I thought, well, Switchblade sister should have a switchblade, so now it's under my bed. So just you try it, burglars. I'm ready for you. All right. On that note, love you. Love our sexy listeners. So sexy.
Love you.
Love you. Bye.
Appreciate you. Bye.
Appreciate you. Grateful for you.
Mwah.
Hashtag blessed. Well,
live, laugh, love.
live, laugh, lobotomy. Bye.
Bye.
Hey there, thanks for being a loyal listener.
Do you need a new website or want to boost your social media performance? Or do you hate podcast editing? You've tried optimizing your website and social media channels, but you're still not getting the listeners, downloads, and engagement you want?
We, the Safier sisters, love helping people with tasks that they hate. We know a thing or two about podcasts, websites, and social media, and we love working with other podcasters and business owners.
So why not head over to switchbladesisterssocialclub.com and go to our Work With Us section. We believe in collaboration over competition. A rising tide raises all ships.
Bye!